everyone. Welcome to MetalNet. I am very excited to have my guest, Rudy Sarzo, with me. How are you doing, Rudy?
I'm doing terrific. I'm blessed.
Yes, we all are,
So
aren't we?
good. Yes. Yes.
All right, I have a million questions for you, Rudy. And the thing
Okay.
I'm always most curious about with you is actually your Cuban heritage. You were born and raised for at least part of your childhood in Cuba. And I was just
Yes.
wondering, what do you remember most fondly about your early days in Cuba?
Well, it's a child, so it would be like child stuff.
Yeah.
The transition of government from non-communism to communism. Those are like the major shifts in my life. Because they change things. Things change.
Mm.
Then coming to the U.S. as a refugee, and which is a different experience than being an immigrant. When you're an immigrant, well, I'll put it this way: when you're a refugee, like in our case, we lost our status. Our Cuban passport was null and void as soon as we got to the United States. That's the one thing that the Cuban government did to everybody who fled Cuba during that period. And so I was stateless. As a matter of fact, when I was touring with Ozzy in 1981 in Europe, I didn't have a passport. I had a re-entry permit. It's like a little piece of paper that said Rudy can come back to the U.S. Basically, no visas, nothing. So when I landed in Hamburg in the middle of the hijacking craze that was going on in the early 80s, airplanes were getting hijacked and taken to Cuba in most cases, And I thought, because I went through customs and I couldn't pass customs because I didn't have a passport, and they were yelling at me in German, and guys with machine guns show up, and it's like okay, they're gonna send me back to Cuba here. And but the promoter was able to talk him into it and pay for the visa right there, and as soon as I got back to the States, I became an American citizen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I became an American citizen, I believe, in '82. Yeah,
Okay.
I got to look at my citizenship to
remember.
date. Yeah.
So it sounded like you had to become a citizen because you're a touring musician and you needed to be able to get back and forth.
And I didn't have a Cuban passport.
Yeah, and
I had no passport. I was stateless.
Was that a difficult choice for you to make, to give up?
Yeah, you know what? It's one thing about being, and I guess immigrants and refugees share the same thing in common: the identity. Anybody who leaves a country and has to adapt to a different country. With time, it's gotten easier in the United States, easier in comparison to, let's say, you move to Japan.
Mm-hmm.
There's no let's say if you come from Italy, there's no Little Italy in Tokyo. I never found it. Because if you want to eat noodles, you eat Japanese noodles, udon. It's the same thing, But yeah, there's no, like in the United States, where there's like little neighborhoods, especially in urban, especially like in New York, San Francisco, those cities where you have a lot of immigrants that came in at the turn of like the last century to build. During the Industrial Revolution, to build the United States, with all the factories and all the skyscrapers that was being built, and bridges and railroads and you name it. There was a big boom. So a lot of immigrants from Europe mainly came to the United States with their crafts, building crafts. So it was kind of like building America, kind of like in the same image as Europe, basically, but bigger, larger, taller, you know what I mean? The American way, And so, yeah, it's now it's easier because there's so many cultural groups in the United States, so you can actually, like my mom we've been in the United States since '61. And because we lived in Miami, she barely speaks English.
Okay. She doesn't need to.
She should. And she wanted to. As a matter of fact, when my brother and I left Miami, left home, and my parents were kind of like almost in retirement, they started going to night school. At my own high school, old high school, Miami High. But, it was a situation that they were older. My dad was still working. So he would come from work and then, okay, let's go to high school and take some classes. And, you know, he should have been in bed sleeping so we can wake up the next day and go back to work. You know, that was his routine. So it's much harder for older people, you know, unless it's like in my case, I spend most of the time on YouTube getting information, learning. Learning. I got up this morning at 6 o'clock, went straight to YouTube and started learning about math, basically. You know, training myself in math, and yeah, there's all this knowledge being shared on social media, especially YouTube. All this, you know, TED Talks. Just whatever subject you want, you have all these experts, and just tune in and just like listen to different points of views and idea about the same subject, but different angles about it. You know.
Yeah. So your parents, because they spent, I think you were in New Jersey for a little while, but probably in Miami just as long, if not longer. So they had probably the opportunity longer.
Yeah. Well, this is what happened. We arrived in 1961. Miami was a sleepy little town, barely any industry, unless it was tourism or anything related to tourism, like boats, yachts. You know, like my dad got a job working with fiberglass, you know, at a company that built boats, fiberglass boats. And now today that would have been like, you know, he would have to wear a hazmat suit and follow certain codes. Back in the day, he just got in a water tank with a sander and sanded the fiberglass that eventually will get in his pores and come home like itching and, you know, toxic, really toxic. But there's, you know, non-English speaking jobs that were all that were available, you know, to the new influx of Cubans that were coming in daily. So we were basically kind of like given an option. You know, you're either not going to get any jobs here, or we can relocate you to different areas of the country where there's industry that would hire you, and you get a bit, you know, improve your standard of living because you're going to get a better job and it's going to be better. Everything was going to be better, you know. And it was done with the assistance of the Catholic Church. So we wound up, my family picked New Jersey. But again, we wound up in West New York, which was very Latin. And we were surrounded by all of these different cities that had their own cultural majority. Like Italians live in certain cities and the Polish live in certain cities. You know, it was kind of like segmented, you know, but the Latinos were kind of like gravitated towards West New York. And it still is a very Latin community, big Latin community there.
Were you able to listen to Latin music when you were in that area, or when you went back to Miami eventually? Was that a part of your childhood in the United States?
That's really an interesting question, because I mean, to me, Latin music, I mean, I grew up with Latin music, but we didn't call it Latin music because we didn't know any other music to identify other music. Like, whoa, that's, you know, I mean, of course we had classical, but classical being played by Latin musicians is still going to sound like the music because a lot of the foundation of the native Cuban music is a hybrid of Afro and classical. Is that, you know, the harmony, the theory is classical, but the rhythms are Afro. You know, so to me it was kind of like one and all in the same thing. You know, then I moved to the United States and I find out that there's other people besides Cubans in the world. You know, it's like, wait a minute, what are these guys?
Was it a trip to hear other like Spanish language music, but like somewhat different styles?
This is 1961. It wasn't as diverse as it is now, because I mean, there's so much world music.
Right.
You know, I mean, I of course, you know, tango, mariachi, that was all normal because, you know, Argentina and Mexico had a huge movie industry even back then, back in the 40s and 50s. I mean, you can actually go to YouTube and watch some of the old Mexican and Argentinian film stars on YouTube, you know, like Carlos Gardel, being a tango singer, and he was a big movie stars, and then you have like oh my God, there's so many Mexican, from Cantinflas to like whoever, in the Mexican movie industry. And those were like the movies that we used to go and watch in Cuba. Mm-hmm. A lot of Mexican and some Spanish, from Spain and Argentina. Yeah.
So when did you start getting into music then? And what were you listening to when you first started listening to music on your own?
On my own?
Yeah, like not necessarily what your mom and dad had on in the house, but what you sought out on your own.
Yeah. See, remember there was no Walkman or no iPhone back then. Whatever was played in the house, everybody heard.
Everybody heard.
Yeah, it was one radio, one record player, and most of my collection our collection. I was just a kid. I didn't buy anything until later on. From the Columbia House, we get for 1 penny.
I remember those.
Like 20 records, So they were usually like a lot of Glenn Miller, a lot of Tommy Dorsey, because that, big band swing, that was pretty close to the sound, not the rhythms, but the sound of Latin music. You have a big band, salsa band, Latin music with horns, and then you listen to, Glenn Miller Orchestra, Benny Goodman, and it's the same sound, not the same rhythm, but sounds similar, orchestration, with the brass and so on. So there was a lot of that in the house. My dad liked classical music a lot, so we had Mantovani, the 101 strings collection, and stuff like that. The Columbia House didn't carry too much rock and roll because this is like, actually I'm talking about pre-British invasion. Mm-hmm. And so we arrived in 61 in Miami. By 63 we have moved to New Jersey, and then I'll never forget, when Kennedy was shot. That changed. It was kind of like the COVID. The nation was in a certain mood or a mindset, And one thing that those two things have in common is that it really affected me as a kid. So I can really relate to children today, how they're being affected. Of course, we didn't have the isolation that they're experiencing today, but I know you feel things a little much different when you're a child than you do when you're an adult, because you only have a certain span of your childhood. It's very short. You're a baby, then you're kind of like a toddler, and then you're a kid, and then child, then you're a teenager, and then you're a grown-up, and you spend more years of your life as a grown-up than you do in those those 18 or 19 years, being a baby to being a toddler and so on. So it's there's more urgency from kids who kind of like, I know we did on my generation, because Kennedy got shot, and it's like the nation went into mourning, one consciousness. That's how everybody felt. No celebration, And so we went through Thanksgiving like that, Christmas, New Year's Eve. It was tough, very tough. No celebration. You're still going to school, but there was no celebration of any of the holidays, especially for Christians. That was pretty tough. And so by the time that the Beatles came on Ed Sullivan, it was just like a very innocent thing. Kids were really ready to move on and become kids again, And now that we're being disrespectful, it's just like, TikTok, time is running out. I gotta be a kid, and otherwise this is because being a kid back then, there was still a draft. By 16, I had, for instance, in high school, they were drafted and they never came back. Being a kid was a whole different experience back then. Your childhood was just not as long as it is today, that you don't have to look at that. You don't have to make that walk every day to your mailbox and saying, okay, this could be the day that will have my draft call right here, you know, and then, oof, you check your mailbox, it's not there. And it's like, okay, thank God, but maybe tomorrow, you know, it's a lot of uncertainty, you know. And so today is a little bit different. Today, kids don't have that urgency to grow up. A lot of them stay at home. They don't leave home, you know. And but that's okay. That's okay. I think people should leave the nest when they're ready, or when the parents are ready too. You know, in the Catholic culture, a lot that's what used to happen. The male was not supposed to leave the home, the young male, until they got married.
Right.
You know, that's how I was brought up. That's how all my friends were brought up. You know, that's why there was a lot of failed marriages. When like high school sweethearts graduated, it was like, okay, we're out of school now, let's get married. And they were like 18 or 18 years old, and before you know it, they realize they don't have anything in common, and you know, so they got divorced. There was a lot of divorces in the late 60s, early 70s in my neighborhood in Miami. Yeah.
So, but you did actually leave the nest and go out west, or actually, I can't remember if you went to Jersey first, or I think you ping ponged a little bit between New Jersey and LA. But you went to pursue your career, and what made you decide to, like, this is the moment, and I'm gonna go do it?
Disco.
Yeah. I love it.
I like simple answers because it's a big picture of disco. Disco happened. I mean, I'm in Miami by then, you know, and I was playing in bars in Fort Lauderdale, you know, going through the club scene, and overnight, disco showed up, and the club owner is saying, well, you can't play those Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin songs anymore. You got to play these. So they gave us a list of songs, you know, disco songs. And it was like, ooh. I mean, I'd enjoy it. I mean, even though I wasn't rocking out, I didn't have that rock out energy or references of having seen Deep Purple locally and getting that energy, and kind of like trying to reproduce that energy, whatever we did in our cover band. You know, that's how it used to be back in the day. You know, we didn't have YouTube. It was you experienced the real thing live.
Right.
And then you went home and you stood in front of the mirror and you tried to recreate that energy, that vibe, you know, that you just witnessed at this arena locally, you know, and you did that every week. You know, we Miami and Fort Lauderdale, it was great for all the bands that came through, because we were a port city for shipping, especially back in the 70s. The way that the tours were routed, either a tour started in South Florida or it ended in South Florida, and then the equipment was shipped out or brought in from the UK or Europe, wherever the band was based out of. So that was very convenient to have all of those great bands. They would never miss Miami. Plus, it was a good party town for them. You know, they could bring their families and vacation at the beach and stuff like that. Yeah.
So after disco, you moved into back into your love, I would say, for rock and roll and the beginnings of metal music.
Yeah, I never lost my love for it. It was kind of like, okay, disco is here. Let's get out of Miami. Let's stay for a few more weeks, maybe a month, whatever. How long it took us to get our bearings of what we wanted to do, where we wanted to go, our next plan, you know, and money. It took money, so we saved the money. We were living at home, my brother and me. We actually left together, and we wound up in Utica, New York. And then from Utica, New York, our keyboard player, Susie, married my brother. So my brother decided to, and him and Susie, to get themselves kind of like settled in Hackensack. And So I decided, you know what, because I was in Hackensack. It wasn't like we were in Manhattan hanging out at CBGBs. We're in Hackensack. It was like, okay, you're married. Okay, I got nothing. I still haven't found what I'm looking for, you know.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, so I found it was an ad in the paper. Some people were looking for band members, and I went over and I auditioned at this place, and they say, okay, great, you passed the audition, but you got to come over to Nebraska. We're gonna put the band in Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska. Actually, it was Papillion outside of Omaha. So I took the train from Newark to Nebraska, went up there, and we put a band together. And that's when we started touring in the Midwest. And we did that for about a year and a half. And we decided, you know what? Oh, because there was a really good buzz as far as the record companies. The Styx had just, been signed. They weren't even on a national label. I believe they were on a nickel band label called Nickel something, Wooden Nickel Records or something like that. And Cheap Trick had just gotten signed, and there was a lot of buzz going on in Chicago. Plus, Chicago was great for a band to sustain because there were so many clubs. You could actually make a living, pay the rent for your apartment where everybody lived in one apartment, playing gigs during the week. Plenty of gigs, because not only do you have Michigan, right next to it, and we would do we had an agent that just booked us all these clubs all over the place. You have Michigan, of course you have Illinois, you got Indiana, and then you got Wisconsin. So it was like this big area of all these cities that they had clubs to play at, and plus you got Chicago with all of those clubs and in the suburbs. So it was perfect. But we thought, now, the well is really drying up for what we're doing in Chicago. So that's when a few of us, not the whole band, but just about three of us decided to go to LA. And that's around 1976, 77. And then we had a band, it broke up, and I had to make some more money in order for me to stay in LA. I had to leave LA. I went back to Jersey to work with my brother and my sister-in-law. We were doing the lounge circuit in New Jersey. And then I got some money, and within a couple of days before I already have my ticket, I'm planning to go back to LA. I got a call from Kevin DuBrow to come on audition for Quiet Riot, and it just happened that I was going to be there. So I did that as soon as I got into town and got the gig. And I think that's going to be another question: what happened with Quiet Riot at some point? And I will answer it. I will answer that.
So what happened with Quiet Riot?
Okay, so I got the gig, and we struggle a lot. It was a great band, great bunch of guys. I got to make great friendship, especially with Randy, because I got to spend more time with Randy due to the simple fact that I was teaching at his mom's school. So, because prior to that, it was just, I would see Randy at rehearsals and at the gig. That was it. But now I'm teaching under the same roof as Randy is. So I got to hang out with him much more, 3 times more. I will be there for like 4 or 5 hours a day teaching. So that's how long I got to hang out with him. And he would give me pointers on how to teach properly. Because it wasn't just about academia at that time. It was basically about, because most of Randy's students were actually fans of Quiet Riot. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of like, okay, I play guitar, but I want to spend some time with Randy one-on-one, right? As a fan, right? So it's kind of like, so now I'm playing in Quiet Riot. So my bass students were actually fans of Quiet Riot. So I'm asking Randy, listen, I got this this program, basically what, what theory I learned in college, but they're kind of like not retaining it, or not, or they can't find a way how to use it. They want to play songs immediately, like whatever they hear on the record, on the radio records, they want to play that. And Randy says, yeah, you definitely got to do that. And he says, look, let me show you what I do. What I do is I teach them whatever song they want to learn. And then I break it down and show them why it works. Why are these notes the right notes to play for this song, and the guitar parts and the arrangement and so on. So he says, so that way you teach them what they want to know, and you also teach them what they should know, which is what your academia side of you wants them to know. Right. So you're basically you're giving them a full, well-rounded lesson.
You're almost like sneaking vegetables into their
broccoli. Yeah, here's the broccoli. Yeah.
Was that something that you enjoyed? Like when they had asked you to teach at their school, was this something that like spoke to you and you thought, this is what I want to do?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I still do. I mean, I don't have a program, but I always make myself available for people that want to learn. I participate in master classes for Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp. From doing Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp for over 12 years, or maybe 14 now, one thing that I learned is the ultimate experience of teaching is being in the same room, one-on-one, especially an instrument, because you're not only teaching musical knowledge. I mean, you can do that all day long, but it's so important to teach technique, physical technique, your hands, your positions, your playing, the sound, and you have to be in the room for that, because that's a 3D experience. You got to look at the musician from the back, from over the shoulders, see how their body language, and that's technique. It's not per se academia, because not everybody has the same technique, but we'll share the same fundamental technique about playing, certain things. But everybody's hands are different. They sound different. You get most of the sound out of your hands. And so, there's certain things that you can actually teach. Theory, you can teach. Academia, you can teach. Technique, that's very challenging to teach that online.
One thing, I did actually take one of your master classes. That's where I got to meet you. And one thing,
that's right.
Yeah, and there's one thing that I noticed about the way you were teaching, because it was a bass player oriented one, and I noticed that when people asked you questions, you didn't just give them a simple answer. You gave them music theory, but you also gave them a philosophy. Just sort of, it was almost like an explanation of like why this is important and why you want to dig deeper. Is that something that you have always done, sort of as a music teacher, or is that something that's come to you as time has passed?
Yeah, I mean, just like anything else in life, anything that happens now, it began occurring. It had a beginning back somewhere, some point. It just did not manifest itself suddenly. That would be like, ta-da! No, it doesn't appear. There's a certain flow to things that happen in our lives, and there's a lot of things that go on that we just pick things, or things pick us sometimes, or we have a collision course, a destiny with something, and all of that. There is a trail to that information that you might receive, because otherwise you say, where did this come from? What am I going to do with it? So you have to create all of this information that you can trace it back to a certain origin. Everything has an origin. Even if it's revealed now, it originated at some point prior to this point.
Yeah. So I know we were talking about Quiet Riot and sort of your path, but the one thing I did want to ask you about those early years and then how it progressed through time is about your stage presence. Actually, I find that you have a very particular style, a very enjoyable style as a performer. And when I read your book, I read a story about how Sharon Osbourne had at one point given you some instructions about sort of where she'd like you on the stage and that. What were those instructions and how did they inform your performance style?
Well, it was very simple. You know, my only reference up until that point was from playing with Quiet Riot as a performer. When I was in Florida and Miami playing the disco bands, stages were little. We were not doing original material like Quiet Riot. Quiet Riot, even with the Randy Rhoads era, was very much with a single-minded goal, was to get a record deal. So everything about the band was geared towards that. And that included putting on a show. When you're in a cover band, unless you're a tribute band that's imitating what the band that you're doing the tribute for, let's say if it's an AC/DC band, you want the guy who plays, you know, do the Angus Young thing, right? Because that's a tribute to AC/DC, right? Okay. But back then we didn't have tribute bands. We had top 40 bands. So you could be doing a song by Johnny Cash and then turn around and do a song by Deep Purple. That was top 40, you know. Ring of Fire, Smoke on the Water. Back to back being played on the radio. You know, so that's your playlist. It's a hit. You gotta play that song, you know. So we were just basically a breathing jukebox. No performance, you know, not even entertainment. It was like, here's the next song, you know, whatever. No rap. Singers didn't have rap back then. No front man. It was just a guy that sang, you know, maybe he played another instrument, you know, a tambourine or maraca or whatever. And so, you know, with Quiet Riot, it was different, very different. It was like, okay, we are setting ourselves up to get a record deal and we're going to do performance. But it was very influenced, just like every other band on the strip, that later on, during the MTV era, like Motley Crue and Rat and, you know, Great White, Dokken, they were around at the same time that Quiet Riot was around with Randy Rhoads. And we were very glam oriented because that was the thing. We were influenced by Mott the Hoople and Bowie and Elton John and Queen and, you know, British glam metal, you know, so that was my reference. And so when I joined Ozzy, it was like, this is what I know. How else am I going to be on stage? You know, and there's Randy. Of course, Randy's doing his little, you know, it's being Randy. One thing is, it was like, okay, with Quiet Riot, we had that thing that the guys get together, you know, the guitar player and the singer and, you know, kind of like the glam rock thing. And then Sharon had a very clear vision of what she wanted Ozzy as a solo artist, the image to be like. And there had to be a transition from him being in Black Sabbath, Ozzy from Black Sabbath. The fan base originally was Sabbath fans that came to see us. It was, a sausage fest. It was a lot of guys there, right? The first tour that I did with them on Blizzard of Oz. And of course, with Motorhead opening up. Okay, so it was like, okay, this is how Ozzy first, and there was not even a vision like what is going to happen in the future. It was like, this is it right here. And then there was an evolution. And the evolution happened one day. We went to, after one of our shows, we ran across the street. We were playing in a theater, and the Jacksons were playing at the Enormo Dome across the street. So we went to see the show, and it was a lavish production with lights and all these mechanical creatures running around the stage. It was, I believe it was the Victory Tour. I think it's the last Jackson's tour. This is 1981 that Michael Jackson did with them. He went totally solo after that. And Sharon loved certain things about the production, like no encore and the lighting and the way it was done. And she says, okay, next tour, Ozzy's gonna, this is what it's gonna be like, you know. So that's how they came up with the castle idea, something very, very big for Diary of a Madman, you know, and little by little, but still traditionally a metal band where the singer was in the middle and then the two guys on the side never really got together. to do anything. It was just one guy one side, another guy on the other side, like bookends, and the guy in the middle going crazy, Ozzy, and so I understood that. And actually, she gave me the guidance that I needed, because from that point on, not with Quiet Riot, because Quiet Riot, we were all like equal members in the band. It was kind of like everybody do your thing. That's it, even the mental health one. But every other band that I joined from after my experience with Sharon, asking me to do this, because this is part of the vision.
Like use this space, right? It was like, don't go off all over the place.
Oh yeah. That's what she told me. He says, don't put your foot on the drum riser. Don't go over to Randy's side. Don't be in front of Ozzy and blah, blah, blah. And stay in this area, which is the traditional metal, thing that you do. British metal, talking Black Sabbath, Deep Purple.
Everyone has their side of the stage.
Yeah, and that's it. Yeah. And sometimes you just ignore each other. You just play, And so I understood that. And ever since, every time I join a band, I always ask, what do you want me to do? Because I get it. Completely do. And in most cases, they tell me, do your thing, because by now they know what my thing is.
Right.
Otherwise, I wouldn't be in the band, And I'm smart enough that I know the variables, the levels of my thing. There's just layers. It's not just my thing is my thing. It's like, well, I know, okay, my thing is like this much, and maybe I'll bring this much of this, because this is the type of band. You have to like be like a cylinder on an engine. Everybody has to be, just
balanced.
It has to be at the same time. You cannot be a guy that's like doing twice as many revolutions of a cylinder as the other ones. Everybody has to be, in syncopation.
Yeah, I did think that not putting your foot on the drum riser thing was interesting, though, because I feel like that's something you see a lot of musicians do. A lot of guitar players and bass players like turn to the drummer, and that was interesting to me.
You see that now.
Okay.
now back in 1980. Well, remember, it wasn't even the 80s for us. The 80s had not been invented yet.
Right.
We were still 70s consciousness.
Yeah. Another funny story that you told in the book was it seemed like you were sort of like the backup costumer / wig cutter during your Ozzy days, that when a new band member or somebody came in, it's like, Rudy, lend them your clothes, or Ozzy needs hair, cut this. How did you come to be sort of that backup person for that?
Well, it was just size-wise. People claim that they have Randy's jackets and everything. No, his family got. What happened was that we had, when we were doing the Diary of a Madman tour, a lot of uniforms, and I call it uniform because we did not wear this off stage. Right. This was our on-stage costumes.
These were like custom clothes made for the tour.
Custom. Yeah, made to match the look of the castle, that goth castle look, right? And we had multiples. Like we had similar jackets, Randy's and mine, same color, And sometimes he will wear his, and we just make sure that, okay, you're wearing that one, I'm going to wear something else. And after a while, like a month into the tour, you realize, okay, this one is really comfortable to wear, so I'm going to keep wearing this one, and then the rest remain in the trunk, the wardrobe case.
Yeah,
smelly, because all that stuff was made out of leather, right? And leather can get really smelly, from the sweat, And you're on the road, you're not going to send it out to a cleaner.
I was going to say, you probably don't have the opportunity to dry clean anything on the road.
You don't. So you just keep moving, and it got really smelly. So anyway, so when it came time that, after Randy passed away, that we had other musicians come in, all the items belonging to Randy were shipped over to his family, and the clothes that you see the other guys were mine, because Randy was very tiny. They would have never fit those guys. They would have never fit Brad Gillis. They would never have fit Bernie. They were my clothes that I'd say, yeah, go ahead, wear these because it looks good on you.
Yeah. You already picked out your favorites. They can borrow them.
I mean, there was a certain one with, it's like a black suede top with like some kind of like elastic lacing on the sides. And I thought, yeah, okay. Because it gets really hot with the lights. And there was some of them that were like really thick leather vests with spikes and belts. And it's like, nah, it's too much. Yeah. Way too much, you know, yeah.
But how did you get volunteered to be the wig cutter for Ozzy when he shaved his head?
Well, I was known, and I still have the same scissors. As a matter of fact, I was just doing a little trimming earlier this morning. Because I usually go to a hairstylist, but because of COVID, I got back into cutting my own hair. Actually, my wife has been cutting my hair.
She did a nice job.
And I found this website. It's called the Salon Guy. Salon Guy, and I recommend it for all of you who are suffering from COVID hair, not being able to get a haircut.
That's amazing.
Go to, and there's tutorials for every hairstyle there is. And it's like, I know hairdressers that actually go to his website to learn new hairstyles. But I've been cutting hair before I joined Ozzy, because if you're on the road, especially in the 70s, like you're playing a bunch of bar bands. First of all, you're broke. You can't afford to go to a hairstylist.
Right. And
you're in the middle of nowhere. Let's say you're in Michigan, playing some Moose Lodge or something, and it's not going to be somebody to cut you a rock and roll haircut, you know? So I cut my hair, I cut the other guys in the band's hair, and somebody had to do it. I think in the Stones,
Sharon Osbourne hands you a wig and you go, okay, I'll make it happen.
Yeah. I believe Keith Richards was the original hair cutting guy in the band.
Oh yeah.
Who cut everybody's hair.
Oh, was it really? Oh, I thought you meant he was like the inspiration for the wig.
Oh no, he was no.
That's awesome.
No, the wig came about Ozzy having shaved his head right before we were doing the Texas Jam, 1982, and he thought that if he shaved his head, Sharon would just like cancel the show. He says, "No, I'm going to put a wig on you."
That's amazing. That had to be one of my favorite stories from the book, because I was just trying to imagine that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. So I saw an interview of you. It's from a couple years ago now, I want to say, but it was one that I saw this past year, and it is the most beautiful interview I've ever seen. And it was with you and Frank Bello of Anthrax.
Oh yeah.
Metal Head to Head.
Yeah.
And there were two things, I'm fans of both of yours, but there were two things that were really striking about this conversation that I thought were so lovely. The two of you gave each other such respect just on a different level, which I thought it was so beautiful, and I've watched it many, many times. But the other thing that was really interesting was, you're both well-known metal bass players, right? But your careers are so different. Up until recently, Frank Bello built basically his legacy on one band, Anthrax. And you've been in so many legendary metal bands. And it was interesting to hear the two of you talk about your different career paths. And I wondered, what do you think it would have been like for you had you been, let's say, in Ozzy all these years, or with Quiet Riot all these years? How do you think your career would have been different? And is that something you ever wished for?
Well, what I really wished for was, like, let's say in the early days of Quiet Riot, because I was never really comfortable in somebody else's band. That's not what I set out to do originally. As a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons why I turned down originally joining Ozzy, is because I was going to join Ozzy's band, and I was already in the band called Angel. That was a band, but I did, and I did join Ozzy, of course. But and I'm so glad. I mean, I'm so thankful and grateful that I was able to do that. I learned so much, and I experienced so much, and so many wonderful things came out of it. But I think ideally for any musician, they want to be in a band. They want to have some sort of a say-so, some sort of a contribution, make a statement, and that's all I really wanted to do. Everything else that has happened in my life has been has been basically an outcome from finding out that sometimes you're more respected in somebody else's band than you are in your own band. Because, look, it's like this. A band, really a band, it's a family that you pick. And just like every family, there's conflicts. Mm-hmm. When you're in somebody else's band, it's all laid out. This is not your family. You're not in a family. You're in a band. It's almost like you're fulfilling a service, basically. Now, having said that, I have never had anybody sit down and tell me, listen, this is not your band, you're fulfilling a service.
Right.
But as long as I am clear that that's the reality of it, I think that's a really good guideline. Always remind yourself, do your best. Do your best, because every time you go on stage, you're going to be measured against every musician, every band that has ever been on that stage. Mm-hmm. Like growing up in Florida, I on that same stage, I saw Led Zeppelin, I saw Elton John, I saw Rod Stewart, I saw Deep Purple. I measure each one of them, mm-hmm. And so I am aware of that, mm-hmm. and I carry that, and I'm very grateful to be there and to be a part of it. And I got to tell you, I put in as much as if it was really my own band. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, I got to say, some of my memorable shows have not been in my own band. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've accomplished a lot within my own band. Mm-hmm. But it was not an easy ride, mm-hmm. just because it's really a family.
Mm-hmm. It sounds to me like what you're saying is, if you understand the context that you're playing in, mm-hmm. you know whether it's your band and you have to put in 100% in terms of like bring ideas to the table and be part of the mix and negotiate, versus being hired in somebody else's band where you're still a part of something, but you kind of know, okay, this is where I'm going to stand. These are the costumes, these are the stage clothes that I have to choose from, and so on. But as long as you understand the relationship, that you can really have freedom in either of those spaces to be who you are as a musician.
Yeah, sometimes, okay, I'm going to tell you two things. One of them is, most of the times I felt like I was really that the people that were in charge of making the decision that I'm in the band enjoy having me in the band more than the people that I was an equal member of in the band. Mm-hmm. They had more like, wow, I'm so glad that you're here and you're doing, it's great to play with you. Yeah. Wonderful, right? And then in my own band, it was like all of this conflict going on, and there's nothing like going on stage with everybody really being in the same frequency.
Yeah.
Because you can't fake a good performance with a crowd. They know it. Yeah, I know it.
Yeah.
I've seen enough shows and going like, wow, something's going on here in this band, because there's no harmony. Yeah. They're not in tune emotionally,
It's definitely less enjoyable as a fan when you see that,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
You just know. As excited as you may be,
yeah,
when you leave, you're like, wait a minute, that wasn't all it could have been. I do wonder, when you started, let's say like Ozzy, and they had chosen you, versus like later on in your career where you were like the Rudy Sarzo, who's been in all these bands and, sort of like not a baby musician, but like somebody who's very established and has this great legacy. Do you find that feeling was the same, of being appreciated and having people be excited for you? Was it more about the chemistry, or more about, your Rudy Sarzo now, and therefore people are excited?
Yeah, that's a good question, but it's also very hard to answer, because I audition every day. I start all over again. It's now what I'm going to do now. I can't say, okay, well, I got, I've been in this band, and I've been, every day I'm playing like 3 hours a day, because I love to play. I don't even count the hours. It's kind of like, I always have instruments around the house very close to me so I can grab them, and I start every day brand new, fresh. I can't look back and say, well, I've done this, so hey, that's it, I'm done. I'll be in the band, but don't expect me to like bust my ass. It's like, I can't do that. I'll probably, try harder today than I've ever did, just because I have more experience, and there's more goals that I want to reach. And the more goals you reach, the higher goals are further up. It's not like they're so near. They're like, now I really have to stretch. Like if you can run the mile in, I don't know what, 5 minutes, and if you decide, okay, I'm going to run the mile in 4.5 minutes, that's pretty tough. So you have to do it in increments to get there. You might spend like a month running, in 4 minutes and 50 seconds. Right. So I shaved off 10 seconds, but it's going to get tougher. Now, if you want to shave off 10 more seconds, that's going to take you longer, Yeah. So it's.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I imagine this attitude that you have is probably why so many people do want you in their band. This sort of check the ego at the door, and I'm coming in, giving you everything that I have.
Yeah.
And not,
The secret is I make really good espresso.
And you cut hair, so they get
I
cheap.
cut hair. A barista and a hairdresser. Yeah.
What else do you need? What else do you need?
Yeah. So, but the longer I do this, the more we're like magnets. We attract each other of like attitudes and ambitions and goals and so on.
Yeah. So my last question to you is a two-part one. What was the best advice that anybody ever gave you in your career as a musician that you're so grateful that you ever got? And what's the advice that you would give somebody that wanted to pursue a career in music, particularly metal?
Okay. So I didn't even listen to the second one, because I was thinking about the first one. I was thinking about the first one. The best advice I've ever received were by musicians that led by example.
Okay.
They didn't sit down and say, well, Rudy, I got an advice for you. No, it was more like me watching them and going, wow, okay, this is why this person is who they are. This musician, this level. And it was like, okay, I'll write that down in my head and live by those, and try to incorporate that into my life. I learned so much. And again, it's not from sitting down and people giving me advice. Because sometimes when you're on the road, you get advice like that from after people have been drinking a lot. So it's not pearls of wisdom, It's more like some kind of drunken rant than anything else. But the ones who lead by example, they're doing it when it matters the most, during real situations, on a daily basis, and they do not skip a beat, meaning that they show another side of themselves at some point. They're very consistent. Like if you are in this band for 5 years, this person is consistently the same for 5 years. Ronnie James Dio, best example I can give you about that. When I joined the band, I have been at this level, touring and performing on records, and for about 25 years. I joined him in 2004. So yeah, over 20 years, almost 25 years. And I thought, I've seen everything, I've learned everything there is, that I can learn from another musician. And with Ronnie was like a whole different level that I didn't even know that it existed, you know, as far as the qualities musically and human qualities. And it was like, and it's not because he ever sat down with me and say, well, this is how I do it. It was like every single day, and it never wavered. It just carried on. This, you know, an individual who was really defined. His qualities were extremely defined, and you can tell that they were old, tried and true qualities that made him shine not only as a musician but as a human being. And it's like, you're getting it because you're living it. You're just not being told about something. You're experiencing it, you know, how this person carries himself on and off the stage 24/7. Not even, it's like, okay, well, this is the Ronnie on stage, and this is Ronnie off stage, this is Ronnie at the bar, Ronnie in the bus. No, it's the same guy with the same top shelf qualities, you know, exemplary qualities. That's question number one.
Number two is going to be harder for me to ask you now, since you are more of a learn from somebody by seeing what they do.
Yeah.
But if somebody doesn't have the opportunity to see you and tour with you and be in the studio with you, is there a piece of advice that you would give a musician pursuing a career?
That is so hard. See, again, because I learned that I learned from experience and not from advice.
Yeah.
You know, so sometimes advice can be a little bit of mind control. Because you're telling somebody, and we all have different references. I can tell you something based on my reference that it might be so alien to somebody else because they did not experience my references. That's why I really stay out of politics, because I have certain references that very few people have, and I make decisions and I look at the world because of my own personal experience that has nothing to do with other people. So it's very hard for me to like say, well, you got to do this, because it's like, no, because you're not going to get it. Even if I tell you what you got to do, you have no idea what I'm talking about and what I experienced and my emotions and how it shaped me into who I am today. We all have different journeys in life, you know, and they should all be respected. And I respect other people's journeys, and I'm not going to be, I will be the last person to say, this is what you got to do. No, I will say as far as, well, this is what I've done and what has happened to me based on these other experiences. And that's my reference in life. But I don't expect anybody else, you know, to be able to absorb that and, you know, internalize it and become me. No, everybody's different. Be you. Think for yourself. That's the most important thing that I could actually get from my childhood. I learned very early, once my thoughts were picked. When Castro came in, they used to keep us kids after school. And I'm talking about, I was 9, so we're talking about 4th grade, and asked me all these, well, what do your parents think about Fidel? What do you think about the revolution? You know, and you grow up really quickly when your country is changing overnight. I mean, there were so many things I can tell you about that are my own personal references, but I'm just trying to encapsulate that experience of like, wow, this is, so I would tell my parents, what's going on? Why are they asking me this? Questions about what you guys think about this or we talk about at home, you know? So I learned about mind control very early on and about the freedom of thought. It's like before this, I had my thoughts and nobody wanted to know about them. And I thought of, you know, it was me thinking. Now they want to get inside my head. And it's like, no. So I would be the last person to want to get inside somebody else's head. No. So and that's my reference.
I think think for yourself. Just never be afraid to think for yourself.
And yeah, exactly. Oh no, you have to think for yourself. Yeah. It's your journey. It's your life.
Yeah. Well, on that, thank you for sharing part of your journey and your life with us today.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me on your show.